I found out I was the heir to a massive fortune 3 years after the funeral. And by then, the vultures had already picked the bones clean. Let me rewind a bit. At the time, I was 26, working 2 dead-end jobs, living in a cramped apartment with a busted heater and neighbors who blasted dubstep at 3 a.m. Life wasn't just hard, it was humiliating. I was busting my ass making sandwiches by day and delivering groceries by night, barely keeping up with rent. My car had more rust than paint. And hope? Hope felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. Then one day, I got this letter. A real paper letter, which already felt weird in the age of spam emails and robocalls. It had a law firm's logo on the envelope and my name handwritten in ink. I almost tossed it, thinking it was junk, but something about it made me pause. Inside was a single page. Polite, formal, and completely insane. Mr. We regret to inform you that the estate of Mr. Theodore J. Callahan was settled in 2020. As one of his known relatives, your name was on record, though not listed in the final will. If you believe this to be an error, please contact our office. I read that line at least 5 times. See, Theodore J. Callahan wasn't just some random relative. He was my grandfather. And not just a grandfather, the kind of man who built an empire from scratch. He went from selling car parts out of his garage in the 60s to running one of the biggest automotive supply chains in the Midwest. The dude was a legend, self-made, sharp, and terrifyingly smart. More importantly, we were close. Like, really close. When I was a kid, I spent every summer with him at his lake house. He taught me how to fish, how to change a tire, how to lie convincingly during poker. We'd have root beer and grilled cheese while watching old Clint Eastwood movies. When my parents split, he was the one who kept me grounded. So reading that letter, finding out I wasn't even mentioned in his will, hit like a brick to the face. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe I wasn't on the most recent contact list. So I called the number. The receptionist was friendly enough, but when I asked to speak with whoever had handled my grandfather's estate, her tone shifted. Polite, but clipped. She told me the lead attorney was no longer with the firm. She gave me a different number. That number went to voicemail. I left 3 messages. Nothing. A few days later, I got a call, not from a lawyer, but from my Aunt Linda. Why are you digging up the past? She asked, without even saying hello. I froze. Excuse me. I heard you contacted the firm. It's been years. Let it go. Let it go? Let what go? Why wasn't I included in the will? I asked. There was a pause. Then a sigh. Because you weren't in Grandpa's life anymore. Bull. Absolute bull. We were close. The only reason we stopped talking was because, actually, now that I thought about it, I didn't know why. One summer he just stopped answering my calls. My texts got left on read. I remember driving up to see him and being turned away by his nurse. She told me, awkwardly, that Mr. Callahan wasn't seeing visitors anymore. I assumed maybe his health was declining. Maybe he was tired. Maybe he didn't want me around. But now I was thinking maybe that wasn't his call. So I pressed. What happened between us, Aunt Linda? Why would he cut me off like that? Another pause. Longer this time. You should ask Brandon, she said coldly. He handled everything. And that was the first red flag. Brandon, my cousin, the golden boy. Always dressed to impress. Always had the newest iPhone. Drove a Tesla before the rest of us even had smartphones. He was the favorite, always. But underneath the smile and the expensive watch, that guy was a snake. He'd gone into business early, flipping properties, running crypto schemes, cozying up to Grandpa with fake respect and over-the-top loyalty. I never liked him, but Grandpa never seemed to notice. And now Aunt Linda was telling me he handled everything? Hell, no. That night, I couldn't sleep. My brain was racing. If what she said was true, if Brandon was the one who managed Grandpa's estate, then something was seriously off. I started digging. I found the obituary from 3 years ago. Standard stuff. Beloved father, grandfather, entrepreneur. But no mention of me. Not even my name. Family photos from the funeral? Posted all over Facebook. There was Brandon front and center, giving some kind of speech. My name? Not tagged. Not even mentioned in the comments. Like I never existed. And suddenly, everything clicked. I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been erased. And if Brandon thought I was just going to roll over and let him get away with it, he was about to learn who the real Callahan was. If Brandon thought I was just the broke, forgotten cousin, He seriously underestimated how dangerous I could be with nothing left to lose. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense, too much sense. Brandon had always played the long game. The charm, the manipulation, the fake respect for our grandfather, that wasn't love. That was strategy. I'd seen it for years, but I didn't think he had the guts to go this far. Cutting me out of the will. Convincing everyone I was some sort of disgrace to the family? Nah, that took planning, lies, and a total lack of conscience. So I did what any logical person would do. I started digging. Quietly. I started with the people who knew Grandpa best, his old friends, business partners, even the guys who used to work the garage with him back in the early days. Most of them were retired, scattered across the state, but they remembered me. They remembered the summers the first spent with Grandpa, remembered him bragging about me. One even said, "He talked about you like you were his own son." That's when I knew something had gone down. Because that version of my grandfather, the one who always made time for me, would never have cut me out without a damn good reason. And I was about to find out exactly what that reason was. The first real break came when I tracked down a guy named Vic, an old friend of Grandpa's who used to help manage his estate before Brandon swooped in. Vic was sharp, retired now, but still had that fire in his eyes. We met at a little diner on the outskirts of town. I showed him the letter I got. He looked at it, then at me, and just shook his head. "You weren't in the will?" he asked, almost like he couldn't believe it. "Nope. Bullsh asterisk T," he muttered. "I saw the original one. You were the primary beneficiary." I blinked. "Wait, what?" Vic leaned in. "Yeah, you were it. The bulk of the estate, house, companies, stocks, all of it, was going to you. Brandon and the others got smaller shares. Your grandfather said you were the only one he could trust to keep the family name straight." So what the hell happened? Apparently, about 6 months before Grandpa died, things changed suddenly. Brandon started showing up more, hanging around like a lapdog, always bringing gifts, always helping. Around the same time, the lawyer Grandpa had worked with for years, a guy named Edward Carlin, was pushed out. No explanation. Just gone. Replaced by a younger attorney from Brandon's circle. Then came the rumors. Vic heard from the house staff, some of whom were fired after Grandpa's death, that Brandon started running interference, controlling access, telling people Grandpa wasn't feeling well, wasn't up for visitors, intercepting mail, screening phone calls. And then, the nastiest part, Brandon allegedly told everyone, including the staff and even the new lawyer, that I had fallen off the deep end, that I was into drugs, that I'd taken money from Grandpa and disappeared, that I had no interest in the family. None of it was true. But here's the thing about lies. If you repeat them enough, and the people who know the truth aren't around anymore, they become reality. I was stunned, furious, and, honestly, heartbroken. Because the last time I did try to visit Grandpa, a year before he died, I was turned away at the door. A nurse I didn't recognize told me he wasn't seeing anyone, that he wasn't doing well. I left without making a scene, thinking maybe he was sick, or tired, or just needed space. But now, I realized Brandon had been controlling the narrative, controlling him. And when I finally looked up the lawyer who replaced Edward Carlin, everything got even weirder. His name was Simon Blake, a young corporate attorney with zero experience in estate law. His firm was small, new, and suspiciously well-funded. No direct links to Brandon on paper, but my gut told me that wasn't a coincidence. I needed to know more. So I did what most people wouldn't. I called Brandon. Yup, straight up. I figured if I could rattle his cage, maybe he'd slip, or at least confirm what I suspected. He answered on the second ring, his voice way too smooth. "Hey there, cuz. Long time." "Yeah, real long." "Mind explaining why I was erased from Grandpa's will?" A pause, then a laugh. "Oh, that's what this is about." "You damn right, that's what this is about." Look, man, Grandpa didn't want people around who only showed up when they needed something. I clenched my jaw. "You know that's not true." "Do I?" he said, voice dripping with smug. "I was there. You weren't." And just like that, the call ended. He hung up, didn't even pretend to care. That was when I knew Brandon thought he'd won, that he was untouchable. But what he didn't know, I wasn't going to fight this the old way. I wasn't going to beg for scraps or sue blindly and hope for the best. I was going to disappear, reinvent, observe, and when the time was right, I'd hit him so hard he wouldn't even see it coming. When someone rewrites your story to cast you as the villain, You've got two choices: walk away or flip the whole damn script. I chose the second option. After that phone call with Brandon, something inside me flipped. I wasn't going to let this guy keep wearing Grandpa's legacy like a costume while I sat in a ratty apartment wondering where it all went wrong. No way. If I wanted justice, I had to stop thinking like a victim and start thinking like a strategist. So I went quiet. No more calls. No Facebook rants. No random emails to lawyers. I ghosted the family, deleted my social media, and even changed my phone number. As far as they knew, I'd given up. And that's exactly what I wanted them to think. Because while they were celebrating their victory, I was making plans. The first thing I needed was access. Not just to the people, but to the system. So I found out who was running Grandpa's old company now. The Callahan Group. A corporate shell of what it used to be, from what I could tell online. Still large, still profitable, but sterile. Cold. No soul. You know who sat on the board now? Brandon. And guess who he made CEO? Some finance bro named Patrick Lane, who used to be one of his drinking buddies from college. I could tell from the company's blog and press releases that the leadership team was tight-knit, young, arrogant, and, most importantly, sloppy. So I pulled a move straight out of a spy thriller. I faked a resume. Yup, new name, fake credentials, new email address. I reinvented myself as Noah Grant, a digital operations consultant from out of state with experience in process automation and internal system security. I used an AI headshot, a throwaway phone number, and even built a fake LinkedIn with endorsements. Then I applied for an open junior role in their IT department, low enough not to raise eyebrows, but just high enough to get into the building. And guess what? I got hired. Just like that, I was inside the machine. From the moment I walked into that glassy, sterile office building, I felt like I was in enemy territory. The lobby had a massive photo of Grandpa shaking hands with some senator, a tribute to the man who built the company. And right below it, a modern slogan etched in steel: Callahan values. Callahan vision. What a joke. They didn't live by his values. They buried them. I kept my head down, acted like I didn't know a soul, and played the role of quiet IT nerd. I listened more than I talked. And slowly, I started to see cracks in the shiny armor. For one, the financials didn't make sense. I wasn't in accounting, but our department had limited access to internal audit tools. And let me tell you, things weren't adding up. Money was moving weirdly. Some shell companies had contracts with Callahan Group, but nobody in the office knew what they actually did. Invoices were vague. Deadlines were missed, then adjusted. And guess whose name showed up on most of the approval forms? Brandon's. Meanwhile, Patrick Lane strutted around the office like he was God's gift to capitalism. Dressed like a tech CEO, talked like a frat boy, and spent more time schmoozing with junior execs than doing any actual work. I started digging into the servers after hours. Nothing illegal, just observation. Data logs, archived emails, procurement records. I wasn't stealing, I was preserving. I built a private drive full of flagged items. Redacted emails that mentioned offshore payments. Deleted files that someone tried to overwrite. Internal memos about restructuring departments Grandpa used to protect. Ones that supported veterans and single moms. Every piece I found made my blood boil. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about destroying everything Grandpa stood for. Brandon wasn't content with taking my inheritance. He was gutting the company and turning it into his personal ATM. And the kicker? There were whispers around the office that the last will, the one I was erased from, was signed under questionable circumstances. The story went that Grandpa was mentally declining when he made those changes. But nobody ever saw documentation. No video. No medical report. Just a convenient lawyer swap and some paperwork that suddenly made Brandon the heir apparent. I needed more than rumors. I needed facts. Proof. Leverage. So I started focusing on the people, particularly the ones who'd been there during the transition. One name came up again and again. Allison Reed, executive assistant to both Brandon and, before that, Grandpa himself. From what I gathered, she'd been working at Callahan Group for over 15 years. Loyal, smart, sharp as hell. But lately, she seemed different, distant, like someone with a secret. And if I was right, she might have been the only person left who knew exactly what Brandon did. All I had to do was earn her trust. Sometimes, to bring a monster down, you have to become invisible long enough to watch them build their tower, then rip the foundation out from under them. By the time I made my move on Allison, I was already 3 months into my role at the Callahan Group. I knew the building better than I knew my own apartment. I knew which executives took 2-hour lunches, which admins covered for them, and which departments were just bloated fronts for Brandon's ego. I even knew that Brandon had a standing manicure appointment every Friday at 3:30 and had his assistant send fake, urgent calendar blocks so no one would question why he left early. I was embedded. But Allison? She was different. Quiet. Private. Hyper-efficient. She kept her head down, avoided office gossip, and moved like someone carrying 1,000 secrets in a locked briefcase. People respected her, but they also seemed a little afraid of her, which made her interesting. I started slow. Casual elevator small talk. Offering her coffee when I made my own. Asking if she needed help with technical stuff like printer settings or calendar syncing. Dumb, harmless things that didn't raise red flags. And then one day, I noticed something. She wasn't just polite. She was watching me. Not suspicious, more like curious. Then came the break. One morning, I accidentally printed a document to her office printer, a harmless spreadsheet, and walked over to retrieve it. When I got there, she was holding it in her hands, eyebrow raised. "Wrong printer?" she asked. I chuckled. "Yeah, rookie mistake. You'd think a tech guy would know better." She smirked. Just a flicker, but it was the first genuine reaction I'd seen from her. "Don't worry. Happens more than you'd think." From there, the door opened. We started talking more. Quick hallway chats turned into short conversations in the break room. Then one day, after a long late shift, we bumped into each other in the parking garage. It was just us. She was leaning against her car, smoking a cigarette with this tired, haunted look on her face. "You ever get the feeling," she said, staring out into the dark, "that you're helping the wrong people win?" It hit me like a punch. "Yeah," I said, more than I care to admit. She looked at me then, really looked. And in that moment, I knew she knew. Maybe not everything, but enough to know things were messed up. I didn't push it. I just nodded and walked away. The next week, I found an envelope on my desk. No name, no note. Inside, a printed spreadsheet from 2 years ago, payroll records from the month Grandpa died. Highlighted were a series of large payments made to consultants that didn't exist in any current records. It was Allison. That was her way of saying, "I see you. Let's see what you do with this." From there, she started slipping me documents. Carefully, randomly. Stuff she accidentally left on the copier. Old contracts. Internal emails. Even a memo Brandon wrote demanding all calls to Grandpa be routed through him, weeks before the will was changed. Each piece was another brick in the wall I was building. And while I was gathering evidence, I was also digging into the legal side. I reconnected with Edward Carlin, the lawyer Grandpa had before he was pushed out. The guy was semi-retired now, growing tomatoes on his porch and writing angry letters to city council. But when I told him who I was, his whole face lit up. "I knew you'd come back around," he said. Turns out, he'd kept copies of every version of Grandpa's will. He even had notes from their final conversation, the one before Brandon shut everything down. And in that version, I was the sole heir to the controlling stake of the company. Brandon had been left some money, a couple of properties, and a heartfelt note telling him to earn his legacy. Now that sounded like the man I knew. But this was no longer just about me reclaiming what I lost. It was bigger than that. Brandon had twisted the truth, weaponized my silence, and rewritten the entire family history. He paraded around as the heir, the visionary, the good grandson, while bleeding the company dry and burying Grandpa's values 6 feet under. I wasn't just going to stop him. I was going to dismantle everything he built. Publicly, cleanly, and in a way that no amount of PR could spin. So I kept playing the part. Quiet, helpful, invisible, while I set the stage for a takedown years in the making. A lie is fragile until it's backed by money and power. But no matter how deep they bury the truth, all it takes is one crack to let the light pour in. And I had a crack. No, a full-blown fracture, running right through the heart of the Callahan Group. The documents Allison gave me weren't just useful. They were gold. Internal memos, silent wire transfers, cover-up contracts. I was building the skeleton of Brandon's empire in reverse. Every shady deal, every falsified report, every fabricated consultant he paid through shell companies. All of it was starting to line up. But I needed more. Not just enough to raise eyebrows. I wanted the kind of evidence that would blow open a courtroom and make headlines. So I started focusing on three pillars: fraud, manipulation, and motive. Fraud was easy. Brandon had been funneling money through a web of dummy corporations for years. The documents showed him authorizing payment to companies that didn't exist or that were created days before a contract was signed. I traced one to a mailbox in Nevada registered under the name of a guy who turned out to be Brandon's old fraternity buddy. Another had a company site that was literally just a stock image with "under construction" written across it. But the real gem? A consulting agreement dated just 3 days before Grandpa's death, signed by Brandon and approved by Grandpa himself. Except the signature was shaky, misaligned, and when I compared it to previous legal documents, it was clearly forged. That's when I brought in Edward again. He took one look at the document and said, "This isn't even a good fake. Whoever did this was in a rush." Manipulation came next. The internal emails, some buried, some accidentally deleted, but still on backup servers, painted a damning picture. Brandon had clearly been controlling communication. There were emails from Allison that had been flagged by IT as inappropriate, just for asking if Grandpa was okay. Emails where Brandon ordered staff to shut down unnecessary visits and keep tight control on access. Then came a chain of emails to the legal department, the one he had quietly replaced. All of them using vague phrases like executive authority and acting on his behalf. But Grandpa wasn't declared mentally unfit. There was no legal transfer of power. Brandon had just taken it, and no one stopped him, because by then, he was the system. The final piece? Motive. And this was the one most people would overlook. Why go this far? Why fake signatures, manipulate staff, push family out, and risk everything? Because Brandon had built his entire identity around winning. Being the heir, the golden boy, the one who turned things around. He needed the spotlight, and more than that, he needed to erase anyone who could threaten it. Especially me. I was the one person Grandpa trusted to keep things real, to run the company the right way, to carry the name forward with integrity. Brandon couldn't control me, so he cut me out. But now, I was holding the knife. One final twist came from an unexpected source. A former nurse named Camila who used to work for Grandpa during his last year. I found her through an old contact list Edward had saved. I reached out, expecting nothing. But when I mentioned Brandon's name, her tone shifted. She agreed to meet. We sat down in a small cafe outside town, and as soon as I said who I was, she nodded slowly. I wondered if someone would come looking for the truth. She told me that in the months leading up to Grandpa's death, Brandon became increasingly controlling. He changed the security codes, started attending all of Grandpa's doctor appointments, even reviewed medication schedules, despite having no medical background. Camila said Grandpa seemed confused, not in a dementia way, but like someone being gaslit. One day he'd ask about me. The next, he wouldn't remember I ever called. She suspected Brandon was filtering what Grandpa heard, what he read, even who he saw. "Your grandfather was tired," she said, looking down. But he wasn't out of his mind. He knew something was wrong. Then she pulled out something that made my heart stop. A sealed envelope. "I never opened it," she said. "He gave it to me 2 weeks before he passed and told me, if anyone ever questions my wishes, give them this." I thought he meant Brandon, but maybe he meant you. Inside, a handwritten letter, in Grandpa's unmistakable blocky handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means Brandon did what I feared. Don't let him win. The truth is buried in the files. You'll know what to do with them." That was it. Game on. You can't take down an empire alone. But with the right people, you can burn it to the ground and rebuild it brick by brick. The letter from Grandpa wasn't just a message. It was a mission, a torch passed into my hands. I didn't just want justice anymore. I needed to finish what he started. So I stopped thinking like a rogue and started building like a general. First stop? Allison. I showed her the letter. Her eyes scanned every word, and for the first time since I met her, she looked genuinely shaken. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew Brandon was going to try this." I nodded. "He trusted you to help stop it." She didn't hesitate. "I'm in." That was all I needed. From there, we started building the core team. Allies who had been chewed up and tossed aside by Brandon's rise to power. People who'd seen things, suspected things, but stayed silent because they felt alone. Now, they had a reason to speak. Edward, Grandpa's original attorney, became our legal strategist. He knew the original structure of the Callahan estate, and had kept more records than any court ever demanded. He also had connections, old school, high-integrity types who still believed in justice. Camila, the nurse, agreed to testify about the manipulation, the appointments, the isolation. She even gave me copies of Grandpa's medical notes that contradicted the mental decline Brandon had claimed. And then there was Marcus, a former Callahan Group accountant who'd quietly resigned 2 years ago. I found him living in a trailer park outside of Akron. He looked like hell, but lit up when I mentioned Brandon's name. I knew something was off, he said. But when I brought it up, they threatened to sue me for breach of contract. Said I'd never work again. He handed me a flash drive. I've kept this, just in case. Inside were months of financial irregularities, documents he'd backed up before he left. Memos, tax discrepancies, internal notes about reallocating assets without board approval. The puzzle was almost complete, but I knew if I was going to bring this to court, or the public, I'd need more than paperwork and a sob story. I needed to expose Brandon in the very world he'd built for himself. So we created a plan, a trap, the hook, a fake investment opportunity. Through a connection of Edward's, we set up a shell company, slick website, polished branding, and a profile tailored to Brandon's ego. Green Core Capital, a fake eco-investment fund that promised massive ROI for corporate partnerships. Just enough buzzwords to get Brandon salivating. We sent him a pitch deck through a contact. Told him the fund wanted to strategically partner with companies transitioning to sustainable models. We baited the hook with compliments, how Callahan Group had modernized under his leadership, how he was a visionary. And because Brandon can't resist his own reflection, he bit hard. He wanted a meeting. That was our in. We rented out a luxury conference suite downtown and filled it with hidden cameras and microphones. Edward invited an investor panel, really a team of lawyers, financial analysts, and a forensic auditor in disguise. Allison prepped Brandon's assistant's calendar to avoid conflict, and Camila planned to show up after the meeting with the sealed letter, our checkmate. We were days away from springing the trap, but I'll be honest, I was nervous, because if any of this got out too soon, if Brandon caught wind, even slightly, he'd shut it down. He'd lawyer up, erase files, and make us all look crazy. We only had one shot, one window to drop the hammer. The day before the meeting, I walked into the building like it was any other Tuesday. But inside, my chest was tight. I passed Brandon in the hallway. He didn't even glance at me, just smiled, smug as ever, texting with one hand and sipping some overpriced latte. He had no idea. And when I got back to my desk, Allison sent me a message. Game day. Let's wreck this bastard. You can only fake greatness for so long. Eventually, the spotlight gets hot enough to melt the mask right off your face. Brandon walked into that conference room like he already owned the place. Tailored charcoal gray suit, Rolex flashing in the light, confidence oozing out of every pore. He didn't recognize me, at least, not yet. To him, I was just another suit in the room, another smiling face behind a portfolio. The room was staged to perfection. On one side of the long mahogany table sat our investors, Edward in a clean, dark blazer posing as lead counsel, Allison acting as the logistics coordinator, and a real forensic auditor disguised as an eco-investment specialist named David Stone. Every camera was hidden in plain sight, behind a water bottle, inside a speaker grill, even in the rim of the projector lens. Brandon slid into the seat across from us and adjusted his cufflinks. So, he said with that trademark smirk, tell me about Green Core. We let him talk. Because that's what Brandon does when he's in control. He talks. And he lies. Big, smooth, well-practiced lies. He explained how Callahan Group had pivoted to sustainability, how he personally oversaw green energy integration, and how his leadership had doubled revenue streams in 3 years. It was all scripted, arrogant, polished, and all of it. Bullsh*T. Then it was our turn. Edward leaned in, calm and confident. We've done our due diligence on Callahan Group, he said, and we have a few concerns before moving forward. Brandon froze, just for a second. A flicker. Then that smug smile returned. Of course. Fire away. The questions started small. Probing. David asked about recent consulting contracts. Allison inquired about sustainability benchmarks. Brandon danced around every answer with vague metrics and jargon. Then came the first strike. Edward slid a printed contract across the table, the one Brandon had forged with Grandpa's signature. Brandon glanced at it, then shrugged. That's old. Legacy paperwork. Irrelevant to current operations. But your name is on it, Edward said, and it was signed 3 days before Theodore Callahan's death. Brandon's eyes narrowed. What's your point? My point, Edward said, is that it's fraud. Silence. Tension rolled through the room like a slow wave. Brandon's nostrils flared, but he forced a laugh. You're not seriously accusing me of that. We have handwriting analysis, Allison interrupted, flipping open a folder. Multiple discrepancies. And witness testimony. David chimed in. Also, shell companies tied to personal accounts, including an entity called BT Holdings LLC. Sound familiar? Brandon's face started to drain of color. This was the moment. I stood up. He looked at me, confused. Then I spoke, calm, direct. Hey, Brandon. Remember me? He blinked. Noah? What the hell are you doing here? Wrong name. But you got the face right. The room went still. Brandon stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. The ghost of the cousin he thought he buried. You set me up, he said, voice low. No, I replied. You set yourself up. We just recorded it. Right then, the doors opened, and in walked Camila, holding the envelope from Grandpa. Her face was calm, composed. Brandon stood, furious. You can't just ambush me. This isn't legal. Edward cut him off. Actually, Brandon, everything in this room is legal and admissible. We're not Green Corps. We're an independent investigation team, and you've just handed us everything we need. Brandon looked like he'd just been hit with a brick. His hands trembled. His charm dissolved. And for the first time in years, he wasn't the most powerful man in the room. He tried to storm out, but the exit door closed behind him with a quiet click. Security was already outside. One of Edward's contacts had alerted the proper channels. And in Brandon's expression, pure panic, I saw it all come crashing down. His lies, his empire, his ego, crumbling under the weight of truth. And this was only the beginning. When the curtain drops, there's nowhere left to hide, especially for the man who wrote the whole damn script in lies. The aftermath of that meeting hit Brandon like a freight train. Fast, loud, and with no brakes. Less than 24 hours after the trap was sprung, Edward filed a motion with the probate court to challenge the validity of Grandpa's final will. Included in the filing were signed witness statements, forensic analysis of the forged documents, and the sealed letter from Grandpa himself. The judge issued a temporary freeze on all Callahan Group assets tied to Brandon's name. And that was just day one. The next morning, the media caught wind. A leaked headline hit the business section of the local paper. Callahan heir accused of fraud, forgery, and family fortune scandal. By lunch, it was on TV. By dinner, it was viral. Brandon tried to go into damage control mode, releasing a public statement calling the claims malicious and untrue. But it didn't work. Not this time. Because we had the receipts, financial records, testimony, the voice recordings from the fake investor meeting, Camila's story, Allison's emails, Marcus's flash drive, and Grandpa's letter, the nail in the coffin. What unraveled next was pure, brutal karma. The Callahan board, most of whom had been manipulated by Brandon or kept in the dark, called an emergency session. Within 48 hours, Brandon was suspended indefinitely pending investigation. His corporate access was revoked, security escorted him from the building, and his office was sealed. I won't lie, watching the footage of him getting walked out, red in the face, still trying to act like the victim, that felt good. But the fall wasn't just professional. It was personal. The IRS launched a full audit into Brandon's holdings. Several of the shell companies he used were flagged for tax fraud. 2 of his properties were seized. A former employee came forward with evidence that Brandon had pressured vendors to inflate invoices and skimmed kickbacks. It kept piling up. And then came the lawsuit. With Edward leading the charge, we formally contested the will. The case moved quickly because of the weight of evidence. The court appointed a forensic investigator to examine Grandpa's mental state, and the result was crystal clear. There was no sign of impairment in the months before his death. The claim that he was unfit had no legal basis. The judge didn't even flinch. The court finds the 2020 revision to the will to be the result of undue influence and fraud. Boom. The will was declared invalid. The previous version, the one naming me as the primary heir, was reinstated. Just like that. I didn't celebrate right away. Honestly, I didn't know how to. It felt too big, too surreal. But then the checks started arriving. Shares, titles, property deeds, control of the Callahan Group's trust. My name appeared, legally, finally, on everything that should have been mine from the start. I was no longer a ghost in my own legacy. Brandon, meanwhile, disappeared from public view. Rumor had it he was staying in a beach rental under someone else's name, waiting out the storm. But there was no outrunning it. Civil suits followed. Potential criminal charges loomed. His name was mud. And me? I kept my head down. No gloating. No press tours. I didn't want revenge to turn me into him. Instead, I met with the board. I told them I didn't want to be CEO, not yet. But I would be taking an active role. Real oversight. Real leadership. The kind Grandpa believed in. And the first thing I did? I reinstated every program Brandon had gutted, starting with the one that funded education for low-income single mothers. The one Grandpa always said was his proudest decision. That night, I stood in the old Callahan boardroom alone, looking out over the city skyline. The storm was over, and I had just taken back everything they tried to erase. Some people think justice happens behind closed doors. But sometimes, it needs a stage so the whole damn world can see what the truth really looks like. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, legal interns, former Callahan employees, even a few extended family members I hadn't seen since Grandpa's funeral. All of them were here to witness the showdown. Brandon sat at the defendant's table, looking like a ghost of himself. Gone was the expensive watch, the confident smirk, the power tie. His eyes were sunken. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped through his lawyer's notes. The man who once owned the room now looked like he didn't belong in it. And then there was me, clean suit, composed, sitting beside Edward at the plaintiff's table. I didn't speak much that day. I didn't need to. The mountain of evidence we'd gathered over the past few months did the talking for me. The judge, a stern woman with steel in her voice, opened proceedings. Today, we hear final testimony and rulings in the matter of the contested estate of Theodore J. Callahan. Brandon's lawyers tried their best to muddy the waters. They claimed the accusations were exaggerated, the witnesses biased, the documents inconclusive. But they were grasping at straws, and everyone in the room knew it. Then came the testimony. Allison was first. Calm. Controlled. She walked the court through years of internal sabotage. I worked under both men, she said. One protected this company's legacy. The other used it for his own ego. Camila followed. She spoke gently but firmly. Described how Brandon isolated Grandpa, how he took over appointments, manipulated schedules, and filtered every message. He was always there, she said. Not to help, to control. Then Marcus, our ex-accountant, delivered the final blow. He walked the court through financial records, pointing out clear patterns of fraud, theft, and embezzlement. And then, the letter. Edward approached the bench with white gloves and presented the envelope. The judge opened it. Read it. Paused. This court accepts this letter into evidence as a direct statement from Mr. Callahan regarding his intentions for his estate. She looked at Brandon. Cold. Direct. Mr. Callahan, this court has reviewed your actions. The evidence is overwhelming. You are found guilty of financial fraud, document forgery, and undue influence. Brandon didn't flinch. He broke. Right there. In front of the cameras. In front of the family. In front of the world. He stood up, yelling, ranting, calling us liars, calling the system rigged. His attorney tried to calm him, but it was too late. His mask was gone. The charming air? Gone. The strategic businessman? Gone. What stood there was just a scared man whose empire was crumbling around him. The judge banged her gavel. Order. Security moved in. Brandon's outburst sealed his fate. The judge ruled to reinstate the original will, the one naming me as the primary heir. She ordered Brandon to repay misused funds, placed a permanent injunction on him ever holding executive authority in any Callahan-affiliated entity, and referred his case for potential criminal prosecution. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just exhaled. It was done. As the crowd filed out, a few people nodded at me. Some offered handshakes. One woman, a former employee, whispered, "Your grandfather would be proud." I stepped out of the courthouse into the sunlight. The cameras flashed. Reporters called my name. I paused just once, looked straight ahead, and said, "This wasn't about money. It was about truth. And now the truth is public. Then I walked away, with my name cleared, my family's legacy restored. And Brandon? He didn't walk out. I didn't just inherit a company. I inherited a chance to become the man my grandfather always believed I could be. The months after the trial felt like waking up from a long, brutal storm. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving. I was rebuilding. I moved out of that cramped, half-dead apartment and into something quieter. Not flashy, just stable. I didn't buy a mansion or a sports car or throw any kind of victory party. Honestly, I didn't feel like celebrating. What I felt was clarity. The kind you only get when you've walked through hell and came out carrying the truth. With Grandpa's will reinstated, I officially took over his majority shares in Callahan Group. The board welcomed me, cautiously at first. But once they saw I wasn't there to clean house out of spite or make rash changes, they leaned in. I listened more than I spoke. I learned the books, the culture, the problems. And I made one thing clear. The old way was dead. We weren't chasing trends or making hollow PR moves. We were going back to what made Callahan great in the first place. People. Integrity. Building something that lasted. The first executive I promoted? Allison. She became the new COO, Chief Operating Officer, and the heartbeat of the company. She'd earned it 10 times over. Calm under pressure. Honest to a fault. And tough enough to rebuild trust from the inside out. Next, we reopened the company's community programs, the very ones Brandon gutted. Veteran job placement, trade school scholarships, grants for working mothers. These weren't just good optics. They were Grandpa's values. His real legacy. I even visited the old lake house, the one where I'd spent all those summers as a kid. It had been sitting empty for years, but when I stepped onto that porch, it felt like time folded in on itself. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice, telling me to keep my back straight and my chin up. I decided not to sell it. Instead, we restored it, turned it into a retreat center for company employees and their families. A place to reset, reconnect. No business talk, just nature, peace, and grilled cheese sandwiches on the deck. Just like the old days. As for Brandon, he disappeared from the corporate world. His LinkedIn vanished. His name was quietly scrubbed from company press releases and profiles. He made headlines again when federal charges were announced: wire fraud, forgery, and obstruction. His assets were liquidated to repay what he stole. He'll likely spend the next decade fighting court battles and trying to stay out of prison. But I didn't waste time watching him fall. I was too busy building. Eventually, I started something of my own, a nonprofit under the Callahan Foundation. We focus on second chances, education, housing, addiction recovery. For people like me, the ones who got written off, who were told they didn't belong. Because now, I belong. Not because of money, not because of a title, because I finally earned it. I'm not just the heir. I'm the real Callahan. The end. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. Did he do the right thing?